Peter Grundy, good afternoon, sir.
Well,
Welcome
thank you
to
for
our
the
chat
invitation. Nice to
about
be here.
how we might assist people in what's quite a challenging environment when people are in legal or accounting firms or other corporate worlds, when they either become leaders or they get promoted to partner. And some
Yeah.
people get spooked and aren't quite sure. Um, so I'm hoping that between us, we might be able to give some guidance to people who are in this position. So I think we discussed at the start that we might consider what people should be concentrating on in the first 100 days.
Mm.
So I've got some ideas from a business development perspective, obviously. Uh,
Sure.
but I thought as you are a leadership mentor, then you might start us off on what people should do now they have this extra accountability and responsibility.
Okay.
So where should they
And
be starting?
uh, planning well in advance is one of the things I've learned. We've been doing this kind of work since 2009 in Europe, Middle East, Latin America. And the common theme that comes through is that when you get there, it's not like you thought it was going to be. And the range of responsibilities that you refer to is pivotal in that because you maybe got there because of your technical ability or your expertise in a certain area, and suddenly they're expecting you to be an ambassador for the firm. There's a pressure on you to bring in more revenue. And these are things that you might not have had much exposure to. And there is a lack in many places, a lack of proper preparation of the individual for making that step. One person put it to me that I've reached the top of this ladder and now I've got on this ladder, but I'm actually at the bottom of this one. So, all that benefit that I've had, all that value I've brought to the firm, they're now saying, yeah, well, that was pretty good, but now here's the new world. And I've seen a number of people in a number of places, they get past the congratulations phase, and all of a sudden it's like, what am I going to do now?
So what should appear in the plan? What type of topics or subjects should appear in the plan?
Well, classically, if you go back to, people like Gabaro who wrote about this years ago, it was the three P's: people, products, process. And that's not a bad place to start. But what we try to do with people is to get them to do some self-analysis. So from research, we know the things that will derail you in your first 100 days. So let's have a confidential, real life conversation about where might this go wrong for you and how do we need to help you to overcome things like one of the things that comes up repeatedly is the Lone Ranger. I've been used to working by myself as an individual contributor and expert on subject X. And now, I've got to have proper relationships with all these other people. And that doesn't come naturally. So I think that bit of self-analysis and also, the preparation, the planning, and the recognition that I need a really solid plan for these first 100 days because one mistake, yeah, that could be okay. Couple of mistakes, and you might not get fired, but you might find that your influence in that organization recedes and you get invited to fewer meetings because you're considered to be a little, untrustworthy.
So
And
what typical mistakes have you witnessed over the years?
I think the failure to move from tactical to strategic. I'm now part of the team that's sitting around talking about the firm's plan for the next 5 years. Yeah, well, I'm not actually that interested in that. I'm more interested in advising on tax or IP law. Uh, I'm now responsible for more people, but I'm kind of hoping to push that off to somebody else because I don't find it very interesting.
It's quite interesting. Most leaders in professional services firms, and there's an element of my tongue stuck firmly in my cheek here, but many of the people sometimes didn't always ask to be that individual, just everyone else took a step backwards and they were left the one person who didn't step backwards quick enough.
Oh
So
yeah,
that's one issue that we see. The other one is that the person who gets the opportunity is the person who used to bill the most, and therefore they are alleged the most powerful, but that doesn't make them leaders.
No, the accidental leader, as the term goes, and also that element that I was billing the most is almost, you know, counterintuitively going to work against you when you get into the partner's parlor.
So, can you explain what types of things people might be doing to prevent these challenges ruining their first 100 days?
Yeah. I think owning your plan. If there is any onboarding provided for you, it's probably not very good and it's not tailored to your personal situation. So I know who I need, you know, I know when my first corporate test is coming up. I know who I need to spend time talking to. I've got my priorities sorted out. I'm keeping an eye on my personal development. Because otherwise there's this whirlwind that you're sucked into. Uh, and people throw themselves into it and expend lots and lots of energy. And then sometimes there's a bit of a fall off in momentum and motivation because I'm not quite sure what I should be doing. And that's bad for the firm. I mean, what we're talking about here is, things that are good for the firm and good for the individual, because the risk of a high profile appointment not making it, apart from the expense involved, the reputational risk is pretty bad. If the word on the street is, well, they hired this guy, Alistair, and I hear it didn't work out.
I would imagine, there's two things. Metrics are interesting when you go. Lots of firms that I work with, there's only one real metric, and that's the billable hour, and that's a
Yeah.
shame. And I obviously work with firms on a dozen metrics outside of the billable hour to decide whether you've been successful or not. The other one will inevitably be, well, is how likable you are. So, likability, whether we like it or not, we talk about, even if you're in the business to business world, we're in the human to human world, and particularly internally. I think when people are promoted, yes, there's a pressure on trying to bring over your clients from where you were previously, if you're a lateral hire, or if you're internal, you're trying to just build work, because that's how people will consider me a success. But the interaction and human interaction and building a network internally and externally, I would think is a huge priority for people if they wish to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of work on helping people project some credibility because, as you know, probably better than me from the firms you've worked with, once you've made it to that position, you have a lot to prove. And unless you've got, if you take the classic work on credibility, unless you can inspire others, unless you've got some sort of vision for the future, you're just that person that built the most hours. And that doesn't build you much influence with other partners. And you need that because, we work people through 5 stages in terms of the first 100 days. And the first one of those is taking charge. You need to be seen to have got hold of this bit of the firm and be doing something with it.
And could you enlighten our listeners with what some of the other stages of the 5 might be?
Oh, yeah, sure. There's an element of taking charge, and sometimes that's about projecting credibility and some symbolic behavior that says there's a new sheriff in town. And it can be quite simple. So one person I work with said, from now on, all meetings will begin and end on time, because his predecessor, not quite so good at that. So there's taking charge, there's immersion, where you do a deep dive into the business on your terms with your priorities so that you really understand what's going on. You're going to make some changes, you're going to let some of those changes bed in, you're going to do some consolidation of the changes that you've brought and the new culture or new style that you want your part of the firm to have. So having those kind of stages to work through gives people some kind of structure. It's not a straitjacket, but it's a structure, and it helps them see that there are steps, and we time them out in the first 100 days according to the individual. It just, it's sometimes hard to see the path when you're in this whirlwind of the new world that you've sometimes wandered into.
Well, I think some people are conscious of politics. Surely there's no politics in corporate world. Um, and they might consider themselves having imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
Right? Do I fit in? Am I good enough? Am I going to make a success of
yeah,
this role? So having an understanding of your past experience and building your own confidence by preparing almost like if it was external, you'd call it an elevator pitch. It's almost an internal elevator pitch that that
definitely.
captures a number of your highlights to date that you can share with your new peer group as to why you've been
Yeah,
given this extra chance. I think that's probably a good place to do. And the word that I use with people is rapport. So I think a lot of question asking and a lot of listening, I would advise. So, people need to have a good understanding of the marketplace they're now in, the firm, the services they offer, the staff, the clients, the suppliers, the software, the way that the culture, the way that people do things, the systems. People need to have a real understanding on why clients buy this service, why do people buy this organization, because that
yeah,
might be different from the previous organization you came from. And this understanding of why people choose one provider other than another, thinking is often glossed over. Or that's marketing's challenge or
yeah,
something. But in leadership, you need to have a pretty good idea what the differentials are, I think.
yeah. And also, have, an ideal client profile for this firm that might be different from the firm, as you say, the one that you were in, so that you understand where you're focusing your efforts. I
Yeah.
think that's
I'm
critical because
just,
you also should be guiding other people and helping them to do business development.
well, you would hope people are put through a fairly comprehensive induction program or onboarding process, you might call it, where it's shared with them what the goals, not just of their department, but the wider organization is. And that should be above and beyond financials, I think, what the
Yeah.
priorities are. Not sure that's always done, but
No.
certainly key clients and stakeholders is where I would sum it up. For the first 100 days, you need to get a grip of the relationships internally that you need to foster. And whether you're using existing clients or you've been introduced to some new ones, I think you need to spend some time in front of people and showing a presence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who you need to get on side to be seen as winning, I think. Um,
As you were saying earlier, have a proposition that they can understand about, why did they hire this person? What's he bringing to the party? Where does he add value? And that other figure of profit per partner is going to figure in those metrics somewhere, isn't it?
yeah, so lots of people will, for the first time, have to consider team dynamic. So, like you say, they go from an individual to being responsible for a team. So they need to understand pretty quickly about the resources that they need or the capability of the current people in that team, how they can
Yeah,
maximize them.
yeah,
Um, and maybe if there are any gaps, what they're going to do about it.
yeah. And also finding out somebody that I'm talking to at the moment has found out that the predecessor was a real control freak. So, everything that got to that person had been past sort of six sets of eyes because that's what she liked. He's now inherited this team and he's sort of saying, well, no, I don't believe in all that. And I said, yeah, I think you need to say a bit more than I don't believe in all that because they've been trained to behave in a certain way. Now, if you're going to change that for some of those people, that's going to feel pretty unsafe and uncomfortable.
Do you think there are any particular leadership models that do better than others, maybe in different types of firms or places?
Um, I'm been working a lot with servant leadership, which Jim Collins brought through in Good to Great, which says that the days of the cigar chomping dinosaur banging the desk and shouting at everybody, that just ain't going to work anymore. Whereas if you see yourself as the person who hands out the credit and takes the blame when something goes wrong in the team, when you create psychological safety in the team, there's a list of characteristics But I think the individual then has to adapt those things to themselves, their culture, and their organization. I mean, now just following something that you sort of heard about on a TED talk and then you start impersonating it, I think that will just add to your imposter syndrome if you've got such a thing.
Well, I guess people will go into the new role and be looking for, to use the cricket adage, get some quick runs on the board.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so, what metrics or KPIs we might call them, do you think people should have to decide whether they're doing the right things here or they're on the right path for your first 100 days? What sort of metrics do you think they should be looking at?
I think there's a number of things that we can help. I think, we tailor it to the individual. So one of the things that people often ask to work on is, I'm not that used to standing up and doing presentations or public speaking. So if we can demonstrate that you're making improvements in that area, that's not a bad metric to start with. Who are those people that you needed to have meetings with? What meetings have you had? What were the outcomes? When's the key corporate test? What are the metrics around that? Because again, we're keen to give people that structure, that framework at a time when, it's new clients, new people, new responsibilities. Even as I've observed, that partner that used to like you and work closely with you, well, now that you've made partner, you're now a bit of a threat because you're somebody else who's at the big table looking for a slice of the budget.
Which
So
again goes back.
in that maelstrom, let's have some structure, let's have a pathway with measures along it.
Well, the culture thing's an interesting one, and I guess will also depend on the size of the organization. So, for an example, if you were working with a global Big Four accountant, your ability to get on internally with your fellow partners is massive because you can almost survive in one of those firms based on referrals from your colleagues, from
Yeah.
already existing clients
Yeah.
than ever go out and talk to strangers.
Yeah.
So again, you would hope the culture in these firms, they would allocate time for the new partner to go and meet other people. But if it's not made, I would certainly be encouraging people to get round their fellow partners quickly and tell
Absolutely.
them what they do, the type of work they do, the types of clients they do it for, and most importantly, the results that they gain as a result of that work. Or as I might call it, the afters, what's left after you've done your service.
No, that's it.
Because
I think that's very good. And again, it goes back to that central thing we talked about own your plan. What's the orientation plan I need? If my onboarding turned out to be, lunch with a couple of partners, that's not deep enough. That's not helpful enough. So own that plan, act on it, and the good point you just made there, put some metrics around it so you know how you're getting on.
So we've talked about the importance of personality, and that inevitably, certainly in my world of professional services, many people would consider themselves introverts. And I've certainly seen lots of leaders who struggle with public speaking, as an example. So, are there any sort of particular traits that people who are more successful tend to have? I jokingly, but I kind of meant it. Be personable and likable. That's the first thing,
Yeah.
first thing in life, not just in being a successful leader or new partner in a firm.
Well, yeah, because one of the things that I've observed when I've been out with people to see their clients, it's like if you're just going to sit there, if you're really boring and you're endlessly talking about your specialized subject, that's not going to help you win any clients. Be interesting, be likable. And I think the other thing is to help people redefine, because I've had people say to me, oh, well, I'm an introvert, there's nothing I can do about it. Well, that's not just true, because there's a difference between being a socialized introvert, where you have learned some things to do, and just sort of saying, oh, well, leave me in the corner, I don't want to be disturbed. That's just not going to work.
So your business is cunningly entitled The Partnership. And
Funny
you've
that.
worked with, looking at the website, some of the larger businesses in the world like SAP and PwC and a various number of things. Can you think of certain situations where in-house training is really, or external training by yourself, has really given these people the tools to take this first 100 days on and be successful?
Yeah, but just to go back to something that you mentioned there, we're also keen that firms develop some internal capacity and capability for this. Because, yeah, please bring us in. We'll be delighted to help. But it should be the firm's responsibility to say, we're investing in this person. I think it sends good messages in the firm if you sort of say, when we bring people in, we all really gather around and help them. I can think of numerous situations in which we've helped people. One of the people that I talked about there, who was, deer in the headlights in the first week, and thought he was going to carry on doing his old job. After he'd survived the first corporate test, because we did a lot to help him, the feedback we got from him was amazing. The feedback we've had from a number of people shows that if you can sometimes get rid of those self-limiting beliefs, if you can get them to take a thorough look at their strengths and areas for development and get them to understand this new world a bit, then you can achieve some quite staggering results in some cases. Because a lot
Well,
of it's what's going on in people's head, isn't it?
yeah, which is why I'm keen to try and define what these top 3 traits might be for people who are more successful, because it's unlikely to just be on knowledge, expertise, or experience. We'll take that as a given. That's why
Okay.
you've been given the opportunity to take this new senior role on. So I'm thinking more about, being personable. I think that's a really key thing. Collaborative,
Yes.
engaging,
Yes.
a team player.
Yeah. Being able to
Um,
explain where we're going in ways
yeah,
that people will understand, as opposed to giving them lots of corporate bullshit.
well, I often to say that many of the firms I go to are over-managed yet under-led.
Me too.
So there's a lot of box ticking and compliance goes on, but leaders by definition have followers. And clearly, in some instances, I don't see too much of that, which
No,
is
I thought
obviously an issue.
yeah, yeah, I
So
thought the,
people's leadership styles are quite different. Clearly,
mhm,
some people are more old school. Some of that might depend on age, even. So, we've now got younger people coming through who have a completely different relationship with technology. They're much more tech savvy than, say, our generation.
yeah,
They have different priorities, and whereas we might walk along the corridor, knock on someone's door and go and talk to them face to face, they're more likely to just send them a text message or send them an email,
yeah.
and that won't always serve you well depending on the types of individuals you're going to be dealing with.
No, and I think it's also in terms of business development, I'm seeing in one professional services firm here, um, if we want to win more business from large commercial operations, because that's where the real fees are, um, you need to get in there, smell the coffee, shake a few hands, understand their business, and talk their language. Sending them an Instagram is not going to, build that rapport.
No, but again, I'm usually in a business on a BD ticket or a growth ticket. So I have empathy with lots of people because they're not taught this in law school or accounting school or engineering school.
No,
And it's often quite a big shock. And in many very large firms, you're not even allowed to go in with the clients. That's what the partners do. And then all of a sudden you're in that partner group, but no one's actually told you. So you've had to learn by osmosis how to do it in the
that's a
first
very
place,
good observation.
um, which is interesting. So, you know, uh,
Especially
from,
if you then might pick up the partner's bad habits.
yes, yes, possibly. They'll all be different, of course. Um, and different organizations will have different views on what successful partners turning over.
Yeah,
So, the very big firms probably, unless you're doing 1 million a year, and that's dollars here in Australia, you're probably not considered to be any sort of success. If you want to be considered good, you're probably doing 3 million. So on the basis of a third, a third, a third, which you're all taught when you go to professional services school, so a
Yes.
third's profit. If you're not making $1 million profit, you're not in the top drawer. And then it's only when you're getting up to a $5-6 million practice, you'd be seen more as a bit of a superstar, I think.
Yeah.
I don't want to
Yeah.
frighten anyone who's listening in a smaller firm. You don't have to be doing those things, but there are lots of people out there who are. But they've learned
Yeah.
how to, like you say, build rapport, bring on a client base. And I have empathy because not everyone's taught how to do it.
Yeah. I worked with a woman who told me in enormous detail all the training that she'd had over the years. And just when I was beginning to lose interest in listening to this, she said, the reason I'm telling you all this is because there are three things I've never had any training in: people, money, clients. People, as in, managing people in the firm; money, no training in that; how to deal with clients, no. It was do good law. That was the mantra.
So, in the partnership, if you went into a business or to see an individual, obviously those three topics may be on the list, but what would be in your armory, if you like? What tools or how do you assist people or firms when you get in there, when people are in this new role? I know you've said write a plan and there's a few things in there, but what else can you assist them with?
Taking a very deep look at themselves. Let's tailor this to the individual. We've not got a list of subjects because what we want to do is to say, okay, where is Alistair right now? What does he need? Where are his strengths? Where does he need to develop? What sort of plan does he need for the next 3 months? So let's actually spend an hour or so just getting him talking and giving him feedback to help him work out what's going to be in that plan, because it's no use taking something off the shelf. He's got to believe in it. He's got to invest in it at a time when he's going to be expending a lot of energy, and when people in the firm are looking at him to say, well, he hasn't got to the break-even point yet.
And that's based purely on numbers again, of course. But people are anxious,
I
there
know.
is an immediate expectation that, particularly in lateral hires, that clients will come with you instantly, and that doesn't always happen. There's often at least a 12 or 18-month lag before that happens,
Yes.
and that creates anxiety in people, I think.
Yeah. And in the firm there, you're below the break-even point because for that first month, you're probably consuming more value than you're generating. And that adds
Yeah,
to therefore frantic activity. Uh, and it's often frantic, unplanned activity.
but it comes into cultures, right? So culture is probably the most overused word in professional services firms since COVID.
Yes.
And even if you go back to a book about from our generation, the books from the classics where they talk about how to build culture, and they'll say, you have to set goals and you have to give people the tools to do it, and then you've got to give them the incentives. And although I see quite a lot of incentives, I very rarely see consequences for non-achievement. There's Alistair. He's been here 7 or 8 years, never hit a number yet, but he's a nice bloke, so we'll just leave him there. And
Yeah.
that can often make leaders look weak themselves to the rest of the team because they're not seen to address the issues.
And why should
Um,
I work so hard when the guy in the next office hasn't hit a target for years, and I'm really
yeah,
striving,
well,
and as you say, there's no consequences.
we're both in training, and it's interesting to me that when firms perceive that profits are not as good as they were the previous year, the first two budgets that are cut are marketing and training.
Absolutely.
And those are the two things that differentiate you.
I
Because it
know.
improves the staff and they deliver the service, because we're losing the title professional services. And the staff turnover is pretty high in many firms, and often exit interviews will say, well, we didn't feel loved, they didn't feel like they were investing in us.
Oh, no.
Um,
I was in a situation recently where somebody had resigned and went to see the boss to explain why they were leaving, and said, I'm part of the reason I'm leaving is because I never got any recognition from you. And the boss said, recognition for what? Which kind of summed up the relationship neatly, I thought.
Well, in some ways, it frightens me because, again, I know you've worked with some, magic circle law firms, not just in the UK, but in the Middle East and so on. And it's still surprising that we're still having a talk here about some horror events that have taken place, probably not that far in the past.
No, but again, if you have, in transactional analysis where they talk about what's the script for this organization, it's not written down everywhere, anywhere, but everybody knows what you talk about, what you don't, how you behave, how you don't. Unless we're prepared to address that and say, we only want rock stars who are brilliant at subject X or subject Y, we're going to continue to get the accidental leader and all the things that happen as a result of that. It's vision from the top, I think, has a lot to do with where we go.
Well, I've often said to people, or I've pulled people's leg who have an MBA, which I shouldn't because my brother has one. He won't like me for saying it, but I'll often say, who's got an MBA in the room? So many people might put their hand up, or who aspires to have one? And then some people, do you even know what one is? But here in Australia, there's an English chap at Melbourne Business School who does it, called Mark Ritson, who swears like a trooper, which is quite interesting. But he's probably the best place in Australia to go and get one, as long as maybe UNSW here in Sydney. But I say to people, it'll take 2 or 3 years of your life and cost you about 80 grand. What do you think you're going to learn? Because I'll condense the learning of that 2 year course into this one slide, because you'll learn that the finances of this organization are only dependent on two things, and that's operational competence times marketing, which is how good you are at what you do multiplied by how good you are at telling people about how good you are at what you do. And most professionals are not very proficient in that second discipline.
No.
So the organizations become obsessed with getting better at what they actually do, but are less concerned about how good they are at telling people about how good they are at what they do. And
Oh no, I was talking
that's a miss.
with a group that specialises in law firm marketing, and I said, what's the common introduction that you get? And they said we get a phone call that somebody says, "Can you build us a website?" And they say, "Yep." On the back of what? What's the strategy? Let's talk about your needs. Let's talk. Oh no, just build us a website.
Yeah, well, it's
No,
shiny and considered easy, but the larger the
bright and
firm,
shiny. That's what we want. Yeah.
and if it's considered to be a full service firm, it then becomes, rather than having a racehorse, you end up with a camel, because every partner puts his hand up and says, "I need to be on the front page," or "I need to be featured," and you end up with a very generalist
Yeah. Yeah.
interpretation of the organisation, really, which is a great shame.
Or the
So,
firm in Germany that wanted a website showing the 36 different parts of their portfolio. And I said, well, is anybody actually going to sit and read that? Yes, they will, because it's very interesting and it'll be on the front page. And I don't know what happened as a result of that, but I thought that's an instant cure for insomnia.
well, I'm conscious that we shouldn't bring on insomnia to anyone who's listening. So I'm going to wind up because we're just over half an hour. If you had to do a summary of 3 action points or 3 things people should take away when put in this position, other than write a plan, what
Hmm.
other advice would you give to people listening?
Some of the things that we have covered about how can you project your credibility,
Yeah.
understanding where you personally want to go and how you want to be seen and how you want to behave, and being able to explain your proposition to other people.
Okay. So in terms of reaching out to Peter and the partnership, how would people go about that?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, or we're at www.the-partnership.com. We have a deck on this subject. If we haven't cured their insomnia, I'll send them more information on the subject. So one of those ways would be fine.
Okay. Peter Grundy from the UK. Thank you very much for joining us.
And
Appreciate it.
Alice, Alistair, thank you very much indeed. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
You're very welcome.